If you can make $1 on the internet, you can make 10. If you can make 10, you can make 100. You can make 100, you can make 1,000. Like on and on. I really found that the highest leverage thing I could do was create on social media. It's really just about saying the same thing 100 times, finding 100 iterations of the same message. Everybody has an unfair advantage, but I think calling out very specific audiences almost always works.
So, Courtney Johnson, welcome
Hello.
to the show. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
What do you
This is
think?
super cool. This is actually the coolest office / studio I've ever been in. I love the mural. I love the converted apartment.
Yeah.
It's like good vibes.
That's what we're going for, coziness and vibes.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming in. I have a whole doc full of questions that I want to ask you. I've seen your content everywhere blow up, specifically on LinkedIn and TikTok, and I feel like your approach is just, one, it's really working, and two, it's different. And I think that it looks maybe a certain way, but it's very intentional on your side. So I want to talk about that, and in particular, like the power of the delivery. Like you present yourself well, and it's delivered and not only articulated well, but also thought out in some of like the hooks. So I'm curious, like, how do you think about delivery or articulation, or do you even think about it at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So my content process all starts on LinkedIn. I put out a ton of content volume on LinkedIn and then look at the data to see what my outliers are, top performing posts. Then I repurpose them again and again and again. So I start to have these patterns emerge of like, all right, every time I talk about this certain topic or have this angle, I know it's gonna work on any platform. And then I actually curate hooks from other people. Like I have a good hook idea TikTok
Nice.
folder.
Nice.
So anytime I see a good hook, I just add it to my folder. And when I go back to record, I choose one of those hooks and like challenge myself, make a game out of it, and then add on the topic that's again like proven through my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That way, the actual content information has been, optimized over a couple of iterations of posting. So it's like gone through 4 rounds of like not just iterations of me editing something on paper, but actually putting it out and seeing how my audience responds to it.
Right.
And then testing out different hooks. It's like the perfect formula.
So you're using LinkedIn to test, get feedback, and validate it, and then you record the videos on TikTok. And then it's almost like, do you ever go back to like, oh, you recorded a banger video, then you can put it back on LinkedIn?
Yes, I do.
Okay, nice. It just keeps going.
I think one thing a lot of creators just miss out on is repurposing content. Like you can repurpose content a million times. Like if something works for me, I'll schedule it out every quarter for the next 2 years. It helps so much.
Right. And it's so hard to get people's attention in general. Like a lot of times, like, oh, I already said that. It's like, if you can't even remember if you put it out, like chances are somebody else.
Yeah, I heard a great quote. I don't know who it's from, but it's you shouldn't think about trying to post 100 different things. It's really just about saying the same thing 100 times, finding 100 iterations of the same message, because we are essentially putting out similar messages or similar messaging themes.
Right.
And I have a personal brand client right now who's like a really cool sports tech CEO, and she will not repurpose even a single topic because she's like, no, I need to have something new and unique every single time. And I just think that is the biggest mistake.
Right. And so you're creating your own content, and then you have what, hundreds of thousands of followers on social?
Yeah, I think I'm almost at 250,000 across my platform. So big milestone for me.
Nice. Congrats. And I don't know if you're comfortable sharing this, but I think I heard you say that you doubled your income from 22 to 2023.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable sharing numbers, or just like how that looked, and or projections, or how you're thinking about 2024.
Definitely. The biggest catalyst for a change of how I thought about money and income was the 3-hour Naval podcast.
Yes, so good.
If you haven't seen it, it's called How to Get Rich on YouTube, 3 hours and 30 minutes. I listen to it like every quarter. Everyone listening to this should listen to it. It's like my most recommended thing because it's had the most impact on my life. And the biggest takeaway I got from that video / podcast was the concept of leverage. I paired that with the book The One Thing, and The One Thing is a fantastic book. The author actually lives here in Austin, and it breaks down really what your priorities should be. So the concept of leverage paired with my priority, I really found that the highest leverage thing I could do was create on social media. And then my next step was to find more diversified forms of income, because I've been laid off from tech jobs. I've had really big clients that I've lost, and when you're betting all on one thing, it's really just like putting you in a shitty position to have to go back down to zero. So what I did is try to initially start with, like, how do I make $1 on these different things? So like, how do I make $1 on my ebook? Like, no, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed at like, how do I make $10,000? How to make $100,000? Yeah, but you really, the hardest part is getting from 0 to 1. Because if you can make $1 on the internet, and if you can make $1 on the internet, you can make 10.
Right.
If you can make 10, you can make 100. You make 100, you can make 1,000. Like on and on. Yeah. It's not. It's the hardest part is getting from 0 to 1. So I first started with digital products. I honestly just tried to identify my top performing LinkedIn posts, make those into a guide, and sell them for like $10 on Gumroad. Then I just Loom videoed a couple of presentations I'd already made.
Nice.
Put those on Gumroad too. So digital products was one form. Then
and when you were doing this, like this was you had domain expertise from working at agencies or just your own like regular day job.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, how can I start to get leverage, record whatever I know, start to monetize it, and then okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that really came about. I saw a LinkedIn post from Justin Welsh, and he was saying like the amount of money you have in your ideas, like people will pay you for that. People will pay you for the knowledge that you have. You're just numb to your own knowledge. Like what you think is obvious, other people do not think is obvious at all. And yeah, in my years of working all in marketing, agencies to tech to freelancing, I realized that what I knew was valuable. So started with digital products, and then I just threw up a Calendly link on my LinkedIn with like, I don't know, $250. Talk to me for an hour about social media and branding. That started to gain traction. Again, I think I actually probably started it at like $50 to, again, get the traction going. Yeah. And then I diversified my services as well. Instead of banking on one big client, having a few small clients. And then at this time I was putting out content. So I started to work with brands on some brand partnerships, and also kind of backdoored my way into some consulting gigs through those brand partnerships. So yeah, those are kind of my main streams of revenue right now.
Okay. And so you started this in 2022. And then that doubled, just everything doubled in 2023, or how'd that work?
Because in 2022, I had a full-time job where I essentially had these golden handcuffs. Like I was making 6 figures, it was fine, whatever. And I got laid off, and I was like, shit, like what do I do? And so from going to that to starting to diversify my income, diversify what I'm putting out, that is what accelerated it. Because again, once you make that first dollar, it's like, oh, I see it. Like your brain shifts. Like I see how this can work, and it compounds very, very, very quickly.
Right. I think you mentioned the One Thing book. I also love that book, and it's interesting. I've read that book and I've gone back through it, and me watching you get excited about it got me excited again about it. You're just like, hey, everyone go download this free guide, and can you just kind of share how impactful it's been? Like, how do you use it? And or if somebody's not familiar, like how should they like approach just having it's so simple, it's almost dumb, but it's just like, oh yeah, that's actually like so impactful.
Yeah, so the concept is, what is one thing that you can be doing that will make everything else easier or unnecessary? And that is not a question I had ever asked myself. I think we like to feel productive, we like to seem productive, we like to project to other people that we are productive, but productivity is bullshit. Like, it doesn't get you where you want to go. And the part of the question where it's like, all right, will make everything else easier or unnecessary, totally shifted how I think about things. I'm like, wow, these things that I was doing just to feel productive, like, might not even be something I want to do. Like, why am I doing this? What are my assumptions? I'm doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it because I think I should. I'm doing it because I want to feel productive. And so it really almost like dropped off a lot of things that you have to do, because you realize you don't necessarily need to like consent to the obligation.
Yeah, there's this philosopher that there's an old quote that I came across recently, and I have like a habitual Google tab problem, and so I have all these things like, oh, I should read that, I should blah blah blah, and like I forget the exact quote, but it's basically like, don't think what does this mean? Think, how is this useful? And so like it's just a simple thing of like, how is this useful? It's like, oh, this actually isn't useful at all. I'm gonna close this and go back to the one thing, and just like it's almost like a muscle at the gym. The more that you or with meditation, it's like the more that you just focus on the breath, more that you like flex the bicep, you're getting better at it. And so it was a good reminder for me of like, go back to that one thing. I'm curious, what are some of your one things right now as you're approaching your business in 2024?
My So my one thing, the first time I read the book, it was post on LinkedIn because I wouldn't have to do any outbound. I wouldn't have to go try to get clients. I knew I would always have clients in my inbox, which again took off all my sales funnel. I didn't even need to really get on sales calls and convince people to work with me because they already had built that trust. So that eliminated like 30% of my work. And then I had a really good flow for that. So my one thing became posting on TikTok once a day. Again, that's just giving me volume, giving me content, not only to iterate to make my content better, but also to get more data to see what digital products are going to work better. To also get brand deals, which is like, that's enough money to eliminate some of this stuff. Eliminate some of my client work that I don't really like doing that much. So that helped a lot too.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great segue because I want to talk about writing hooks and captions and some of the repeatable formats. Again, like if somebody looks at Courtney's feed, there are certain things you click on and it's like, oh, I have to watch this because it's like so well, like the hook is so good. And you also have a lot of these repeatable formats, which I think is so important for any creator. It's just like, oh, what do I create today? It's like, you already know what works, so let's just like iterate on that. And so one of your things is problematic cheat codes. And like, just for an example for the listeners, like here's one of the initial hooks. And so I guess before I even say it, if you study copywriting, like back in the day, it was like blogs, and the headline really, really matters, right? It's just like, how do they read the next sentence and the next sentence? And then now the evolution onto YouTube, the headline is still now the title, but it's also the thumbnail. And now with just more almost video first content, it's not only it's that initial 3 seconds, right? It's like, okay, what are you actually saying? And what are the words in the background? And you use that combination so powerfully where it's just like, here, I'll just give some examples. You have, I think this was a problematic cheat code, career cheat code, and your intro was, cancel me, call me fake, I don't care. These are the most unhinged things I've done to get ahead in my career. Which is like, how are you not going to watch that? Because it's such a good intro. And so I'm curious, like, and then you follow it up too. Like I'm curious if you want to just get the people like a little riled up. And then you also have like really good advice and tips sprinkled in there. And so like, how do you come up with that?
Yeah, I have this process that I call baiting the fish and or baiting the trolls. And when I come up with a topic, I try to think like preemptively about what the trolls are going to say and then agitate that in the hook.
Nice.
So I knew in that video, I talked a lot about like kind of branding myself. And a lot of people think branding is fake or like branding is bad. And so I agitated that in the hook. Actually, my top performing video of all time was about my house. And I bought my first house this year. Very exciting. The hook, I knew if I put out a video about buying my first house, people would be like, oh, sugar baby or Nepo baby or like, you're like something about me being a woman. So I agitated that. I was like, when you randomly decide to buy a house, I obviously did not randomly decide to buy a house. I saved for like years and worked really hard. But it agitated people and blew up the video. So that's a big part of my hooks. And then also honesty, like having honesty to get your audience to start to build trust with you over like if you're saying, oh my God, this thing changed my life, like only talk about things that actually did change your life.
Follow it up, right?
You have to follow it up or they're not going to believe it. If you say that on every video, they're going to be like, ah.
Right. Another example here, which I thought was good, it's like lazy girl manifesting hack, the perfume trick. It's just like, that's like very much talking to a specific person who's going to watch that video. And probably a lot of other people are going to watch it. It's just so like, intriguing. And so like, what is that? How'd you come up with that? Or like, what is that?
Yeah, well, I also have a formula in a lot of my hooks where I just try to go as niche as possible. So instead of here's what you need to know about social media from a social media manager, like here's what you need to know about social media from someone who has managed the LinkedIn accounts of, over 100 tech CEOs, like getting super, super specific. And in that one, it's not just here's a manifestation hack. It's like, here's a manifestation hack for lazy girls like me. And you're kind of relating to that. I also have some videos that are like, this is only for the career girlies. And some guys will reach out and be like, it's funny because every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, I'm a career girly too. But I think calling out very specific audiences almost always works.
Yeah. And it's almost like you're, I guess, baiting them, but also like almost like pulling on a little lever or tugging on an emotion, right? Where like another one was like, how to be more respected in your org. And so you're talking there to people who are trying to move up their career. And like one of the first things you said was like, stop working 8 hours a day. So it's just like these things like, oh, am I working hard enough? Am I working not like too much, too little? And like, I want to be respected. And so like, it's one thing just to say words, you tug at the emotion, it seems.
Yeah, I want to kind of poke people because I do care about behavior change. Like content is a powerful platform. Content is how we all make decisions. And so it is a big like responsibility as a content creator. You can impact behavior change of other people. Totally. So with stuff like that, I just try to think of how can I make this content that is not easily Googleable? Right. Because if it's easily Googleable, like everybody knows the same information. So I think like, what are people not talking about? What's not being said? What advice is not in any books I read? I just had to pick up. That's the stuff that's always going to perform best.
Right. Or how Naval would put it, is like specific knowledge, right?
Specific knowledge, absolutely.
And if you combine that with like story and like personal example, it's like people are like, oh, at least that's how my brain works too. It's like, now that I've seen an example that's like relatable, it's like, oh, I think I could try that. I haven't tried the perfume hack yet, but maybe I'll have to try that one next.
No, you're exactly right. And another way to do it, if you don't necessarily want to share a lot about yourself, or maybe don't have stories that you find interesting, is you can tie in a celebrity or something going on in the news to what you already have. So, for example, instead of here's how I would, I'm a lawyer and here's how I would work with a client. Instead, I'm a lawyer, here's how I would work with Taylor Swift with her Spotify legal battle, right? It's the same thing. You're talking about the same thing, but just adding, like, you're almost stealing the leverage of that popular icon or thing. Right. So people that always consume Taylor Swift content are going to stop and watch that video, even if they don't care about legal matters, and you're going to get so many more views too.
Using story and borrowing credibility or authority to insert there. I like that. That's super smart. The other thing is, so I think maybe towards the end too, we'll talk about specific things that people could do to start today. But also, I want to just talk more about some of the ones that have worked really well with you, these like unhinged hacks. I'm curious, I also, write ideas, and I know not all the ideas make it into content that's published. For your unhinged series, is there anything that's like, this is just too unhinged, I can't like say this? Like, is there anything that comes to mind that you've written down that you haven't shared?
Yeah, I have two things come to mind, and I've shared both of them like semi-publicly, like on my Patreon, or I've kind of talked about on TikTok, but they're a little unhinged. But one is manipulating people's perception of you using unconscious bias. And so to really explain unconscious bias, you have to kind of you have to bring up in your consciousness the biases that you have around others. So that gets into like racism, sexism, like bigotry that we have buried deep down. For example, my partner is a doctor, and when we first started dating, I had like an unconscious bias assumption that we would go to his holiday party and there'd be a group of doctor wives, and then I would hang out with them. Oh, well, that was like deep down buried sexism that I had not brought to, I had an unconscious bias that like doctors equals boys, and so when I went to this Christmas party, it was actually a group of husbands that I was like hanging out with, and I'm like, wow, I recognize that. So that's an example, and that's something I don't talk a lot about publicly, because then you're getting into a lot of conversations that just like have a lot of nuance. Yeah. But there are little ways to manipulate people's unconscious bias of you, because our brains take super shortcuts. So for example, if you see a lot of people with glasses that are smart, your brain is going to make a shortcut of somebody's wearing glasses and they are smart. So we can find these cues and bring to consciousness the cues that we have in others and what our brain's unconscious assumptions are, and lean into certain qualities in ourselves, or lean out of certain qualities of ourselves depending on how we want to be perceived. So it's all kind of like psychological manipulation. That's a cheat code that.
So in a practical sense, like the glasses thing.
The glasses,
will you wear do you wear glasses?
I wear glasses, but I need them. Yeah. But I could wear contacts, but I wear glasses. I'm not wearing them right now. So that's a problematic cheat code that I don't dive too much into. I did like a Patreon episode about it. And then my most unhinged cheat code is psychedelics. That's like, I feel like that's something that is almost like taboo to talk about, but every like entrepreneur I'm surrounded by like has some sort of practice with it, but nobody talks about it because it's like this sacred, like secret thing.
Right.
So yeah, I've posted about it a few times, but my videos always get taken down.
Yeah. What? I'm just curious. Maybe this part gets taken down, but
I don't care. I'm an open book.
We're unhinged right now. What psychedelics or like what does your practice look like, or what's been most helpful?
I mean, there's been a few a few things. I think like mushrooms is a good place to start.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's easy to access and like pretty gentle.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just been the most impactful thing I've ever done for my creativity, my focus, my work,
Yeah.
my physical health, my mental health. Yeah, and again, like it seems like all the self-made successful people have some sort of practice with it but aren't talking about it publicly.
Yeah.
It's like it's a huge cheat code.
Yeah, my observation with it is that we all have the rational mind of, oh, I have to-do list and productivity and blah blah blah, blah, and it's just a new way to look at yourself. It's really hard to read the label from inside the bottle, and so by getting different perspectives of our own lives, we were talking about South America before, and when I went there and ended up doing an ayahuasca ceremony naturally, it was like one of the most impactful things in my life because it got to like look at myself in a new way. And one of the things that came up with me was like health is number one. And so I was like, oh yeah, like I've prioritized health for a decent amount the last 5-6 years, but I've never said health is number one. And I was like, okay, well, what role does alcohol play in my life if health is number one? I was really kind of fighting with that. And so I was like, I still don't know. And I'm not going to never drink again, but I haven't drank in 7 months. And so that's just like a little thing. And I look at my life the last, 6-7 months. It was like, this has been like each month I keep on being like, oh, this has been the best month of my life.
Yeah.
This is great. And so like, I think that, no, I don't need it to like have a new perspective or anything like that, but it's helpful. And so like, I think that's what the point you're trying to make.
Definitely. And you don't need drugs to do it. Meditation, yoga, breath
Right.
work, those are all great practices that produce the same result, just takes more time. But it is just ultimate cheat code.
Totally. And another cheat code too that I've observed and am like implementing myself a little bit more, partially influenced by the book The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
So
I don't know if you've
good.
seen that. And so he talks about the difference between one zone of excellence and one zone of genius. And he, like, you sometimes get into upper limit problem once you're making that leap. And for him, like, he's really dialed in. He's like mentored Michael Dell and like all these people. He's like this old consultant, and he's very good at saying no to some things. And I think that's, as you get more and more opportunities, it's sometimes hard to say no. And having a really like firm understanding of not only your zone of genius, but like in order to get there, it's been helpful for me to look at what is my unfair advantage. And so like for me, for example, I work at AppSumo and I'm like able to like mess around with content. Like we're at their office, they're like helping, like they're letting me do all this. It's like, it's kind of an unfair advantage. Like this is fun for me. It's literally a Sunday and like, this is fun to like hang out and do this. And so it's like, oh, that's an unfair advantage to me. How can I go way harder there? And living in Austin and having a bunch of friends who are like doing interesting things feels like an unfair advantage. I'm curious, how do you look at it like that, or what are some of your unfair advantages?
I think that is a great topic. Everybody has an unfair advantage. A lot of my mentorship clients, when they're like, I don't know what to post, I have nothing to post, there's nothing interesting about me, but you are numb to what's interesting about you. What's interesting about you could be like, your grandparents live on a farm with really cute cows, and that leads to something else, whatever. Or
Totally.
maybe you live in New York City, or you live in whatever, you live in Chicago. Like, there are so many people that are like, that is my dream to move to Chicago.
Totally.
Every single person has an unfair advantage. I mean, I think things can be advantages and disadvantages. So one of my also, I haven't talked about this much, pretty unhinged cheat codes is as a woman, like shapeshifting or hotness, depending on the situation that you're in. So being a woman can be obviously a disadvantage in business, but it can also be an advantage if you know how to use it right. I also have a really crazy house that's been a huge advantage in my content. And actually, when I bought the house, I was like, this is a little over my budget, but it's going to be good for content.
Your
like,
tram videos get millions of views.
Yeah, it's crazy. So
wait, back up. What's shape-shifting your hotness?
Okay, so shape-shifting your hotness is it's the same as, it's kind of going back to the unconscious bias example. So over-indexing or under-indexing on your appearance, depending on the goal or the outcome. So if you're in a job interview, with another woman who's interviewing you, like psychology and power dynamics tells us that we need to shapeshift down your hotness a little bit. So maybe pull your hair all the way back, don't wear makeup, put glasses on, because when you're being interviewed by another woman, there's like a primal, you know, like fight going on. Yeah, like competitive thing going on. Or if you're trying to make new friends, it's usually better to under-index on your hotness.
So you will actively try to look less attractive in some circumstances.
Yes.
Really?
I actually when I finally launched my TikTok, I did a lot of things to under-index on my hotness because I knew people wouldn't take me seriously when I started to talk about this type of stuff, like career stuff on TikTok. So originally I was posting about Airbnb stuff because I also have an Airbnb, and I was like being cute and bubbly and whatever, but I wasn't necessarily being taken seriously. So I made a lot of changes thinking I'm going to be taken seriously now. And then I needed to temporarily do these changes to kind of make not me the center of these videos, but the information. And it worked really well. Luckily I don't have to do that anymore, but I like dyed my hair brown. I like cut it all off, like so much that I did to make the video about the content.
That is wild. That's super interesting.
It worked.
I've never thought of that, nor does that ever cross my mind. But it makes sense the way that you break that out. You're talking about a little bit about like niches and how you think about it. I think that this could be a tricky thing. On one side, it's like, oh, talk to the customer and be very specific, understand them. And then the other side, you can maybe get a little too maybe pigeonholed there. How do you think about it in the sense of like perhaps that like we are the niche in our own like most interesting, like whatever we're interested in, and like having a little bit more flexibility there versus staying in one
yeah,
niche?
I don't believe in niches. I think in order to be interesting, you have to be interested. So it literally just comes down to talking about the things you're interested in. Oftentimes, too, if you pick a niche, you're right, you get very pigeonholed and you don't have the at-bats for other topics that you care about. So maybe you have a software sales job and you're also really into working out, and you also are really into like video games. Maybe you're only talking about working out and your job, but video games is actually the thing that is going to take your content like to the moon. Also, if you only talk about one thing, there's no other like hook for somebody to latch onto emotionally to you.
Right.
So a lot of times I see, especially people like making content on LinkedIn, only talking about their jobs, but I'll encourage them, just post one thing about your dog. Just post one thing about the triathlon you ran.
Right.
And then oftentimes that's when the customers reach out and they get a ton of inbound because they have that connection point of like, hey man, I actually run triathlons too. Like, let's chat. That leads to a relationship that leads to a sale that would have never happened.
Right. So you're being relatable.
Exactly.
And finding different onboarding ramps to be like, okay, we could end up talking about these things over here, but also this is really interesting and maybe that attracts new potential customers.
Yeah, it will, because also every organization, everything you're selling has a competitor. Like everything has a competitor. And a lot of times we're not making rational decisions around pricing or structure or whatever. You think that that's what they're making decisions about. It's normally not. They might want to work with you just because they vibe with you. Or like when it comes to content, somebody might follow my career cheat codes and not somebody else's just because they're also a young woman and they feel like they relate to me. Right. And maybe somebody's following somebody else. Like these things aren't logical. And so if we create content and create marketing, create sales just around logic, it's not going to work because humans don't make decisions logically.
Right. And even going back to the unfair advantage thing, you could almost create an unfair, like I think you've created an unfair advantage for yourself by talking about these unhinged things on a professional platform like LinkedIn. Everyone's like buttoned up and going like extra like conservative, and you are almost taking the opposite approach. And it's calculated too. It's not like you're going wild on there, but you're talking about these things in a way that nobody else is talking about, like thus creating your unfair advantage.
It's honesty too. I think honesty is like a privilege if you're able to be honest in your content. Like it took me a while to get there because if I was just starting in my career, I'd probably isolate a lot of potential job opportunities or clients. Right. But I feel like I got to the place where I had respect in the sales world, in the marketing world, and tech world, where I could start to be more honest. But I think that compounds too. When you start to get really honest in your content, it's just easier and easier.
Right. Okay, I got a handful of other things I want to get through as well. One of your most popular videos, I think, is like, I was curious, like, what you see a lot of people doing content probably not well, and so one of your most popular videos, I think, is like why brands suck or something, and or why brands suck at content, and like, what do you think the biggest mistake that either brands are making or individuals that you see?
Bureaucracy in brands. If you have to go through 12 approval channels to get something out the door, it's every single or every single approval level is diluting and diluting and diluting it. Also just wasting time, so you really got to trust your team and trust that your team probably knows a platform more than you. Like if you're a CMO and you're like 50 years old and you have this advertising industry background and you have 22-year-olds that are running your TikTok, like let them do it. Just hands off a bit. You don't understand the culture of the platforms.
Right.
So yeah, trust your team. The bureaucracy just sucks out any soul in the content and sucks out any honesty, which is it's a total waste of time and money. And then what creators do, I think, is just trying to put a filter on everything, not a real physical filter, but a filter of how they think they should show up.
Right.
Based on the assumptions of what other people are doing. So like, I should do this on TikTok. I should have this. I should introduce myself. Like just all of these random things. But I think the best pieces of content come from what's really driving you and really inspiring you. And again, just like going through all those layers, when you're putting these filters on it or putting this edit, it just is removing any soul.
Yeah. And so just to sort of distill that, it sounds like speed and trust, and both of those create more reps, and so you're ultimately getting more feedback, right? That's kind of what you did. You got a bunch of feedback. You see what happens on LinkedIn. Now you're like, oh, okay, I could go harder over here. I got the feedback, and then now I could create something that's like real and relatable. Another one of your videos, or I think you've talked about wealthy people / entrepreneurship cheat codes, and you listed out a couple. Like one of them was bringing signature gifts everywhere, which I really liked. Do you do that, or have you seen interesting signature gifts?
Yeah, so a signature gift is, so I made that video because I'm from a very small town, very small rural town, and I had never even like parked in a parking garage when I moved to initially Dallas, and all of these things were really overwhelming. And working in marketing and sales and just like being around these successful people, I did not know how to communicate with them. And so a lot of those are the things that I learned along the way. But the signature gift is so good because it makes you memorable. I do have a signature gift. I always just bring something from the farmer's market. But I have a friend that's from Greece, and he orders these really beautiful bottles of Greek olive oil and gives them out. I have another friend that makes like honey scented candles and brings them.
Unique.
Yeah, if just having a unique thing that's personal to you that you're maybe giving your prospects, maybe giving your friends, maybe giving your clients, it really makes you stand out.
Right, and then also not asking what you do.
Not asking what you do. Yeah, what you do I found can be like offensive to people because one, you're categorizing them as just their job, and two, you're assuming that they do have a job when maybe they don't. Most of them probably don't have traditional type jobs. Right. So a better question is like, what are you working on? What's interesting to you right now?
Right.
What's keeping you like excited?
Yeah, I noticed when I moved to Austin, relative to other places, they might ask, what do you do? Here, they often ask, what do you do for fun? And so that like just starts out more playful and like human connection. And then it ultimately could go back to like, oh yeah, and also do, but by the time you talk about the business stuff, you've already established rapport. And I heard Simon Sinek say this thing, which I think is the best one. I think it's relationship dependent, but he's like ultimately answering the question, what do you believe? And by him stating out like what he believes, he's like, oh, I'm a big believer in why, blah, blah, blah. Like his life changed as soon as he put that out there. And then he ultimately wrote a book about it. It's like becomes a best-selling author and all these things. But you just become a magnet for the people like-minded or like-hearted when you're like sharing what you truly believe versus like, oh, what do you do? It's like you almost turn into robot mode on what do you do.
Exactly. Also, just what do you do brings up, again, going back to unconscious bias and these unconscious assumptions, it brings up so much that you're priming the other person to have unconscious bias about you before you even, like you said, talk about the conversation. So if you're like, what do you do? Oh, I'm in tech sales. Immediately, their unconscious bias is going to be like, bro, like, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like, it's just, do you want to lead with that? Because often, like, we as humans have a first impression bias where the first thing we think about something the first thing we think about someone is the lasting impression we have, even if we're then proven wrong.
Right.
So if you say I work in tech, sales, and I'm a dude, somebody says like douchey tech bro, it's hard to rid that. So that's really good that you're starting with other things.
Right. Okay, so the next one is your words, not mine. But how do you gaslight yourself into being delusional?
It's funny because I think a lot of these concepts are, at least I take them from like a lot of old yoga teachings and meditation teachings, but I interpret them for the girlies. So gaslighting yourself into being delusional is really just learning affirmations and learning how to retrain your brain to see the positive and see what you're grateful for, and kind of transition to the motivation brain rather than the lack brain.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I've thought about this before too. As I don't know, go across life and learn more things for myself. It's kind of like all the cliche things are really true. You just need a way to re-say them. Like, I don't know, like I didn't look at childhood trauma ever because I was like, oh, that like my childhood was great. And then like it was not even a year ago, I was talking to a therapist and like talking through some stuff. I was like, oh, I got some stuff. Like, interesting. I just like was looking at trauma wrong because I was ignoring it completely. And so I think it takes an extra layer of like getting curious and examination. Maybe that means through like using different words such as like how you're gaslighting yourself to become delusional. It was like, oh yeah, like just being kind to yourself and like the power of affirmations or really just selective attention too, maybe, right?
Definitely. Words are so important. Like even like I was saying earlier, should versus have to. Like if you're going into your work being like, oh, I have to check my email today, versus want to, right? It's much better going in being like, oh, I want to do this. If you don't want to do it, maybe step back and think about why you don't want to check your email. Do you not like your job? Do you not like admin work? Is that something you need to delegate? Do you need to add another layer of fun to it? It just kind of it kind of breaks down the aspects of what you like, what you want to do, what you don't want to do, which like ultimately brings you to your purpose. But I love your point about the platitudes, like becoming real. I've definitely noticed that for me in the last few years of actually specifically through psychedelics of all of these platitudes, like live your dream, like live, laugh, love, or like, these like little quotes that we hear. You're like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, live your dream. Okay. Yes.
Stillness, silence. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, oh, gratitude.
Family.
Damn. That's important.
Yeah, totally. What's your team look like? Is it just you? Do you have a VA? Do you have a team? What's it look like?
It's me plus a VA, and then I have 2 other like social media coordinators part-time that help me with just scheduling and social content, all that.
Yeah. Do you have either an actual or an aspirational hourly amount?
Yeah, I upped it from $100 to $250 in 2023, but now it's 2024. So I'm changing my aspirational rate to $500 this year.
Nice.
So working on that and working on what more things I can delegate.
And so aspirational, I think just like quick math for people, if there's roughly, you could take your actual salary and divide it by 2,000 and to get to like, oh, what would I make, in a already with my salary hourly, and be like, oh, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's like, oh, I'm not going to return that thing on Amazon because I can make fun. It's like, dude, I should have returned that. That's so dumb. But like, I think it's a good directionally to be like, okay, I need to delegate some of these things where it just doesn't make sense to. And so is your aspirational one your actual that you'll charge customers, or how do you look at it in terms of like, how do you delegate?
Yeah, I look at it as if it would cost less than that to delegate, I do my best to delegate it. And then, aspirational with customers. So if I'm doing like a client project or some consulting, I'll just multiply how much time I think it's going to take by that number, and that's my number for the proposal,
right, rather
than charging hourly. But it's definitely a work in progress. It can be really hard because you really have to trust yourself that you have to trust yourself. You have to value your time a lot, and that's like a muscle.
Yeah, totally. And how did you find your VA? And like, how do you, if you're open to sharing kind of like very specific things that is helpful for you to get out of your brain and to focus on, free up your time?
I love my VA. I love the program I do it through. It's called Time, etc., and they're actually all U.S. based. Because I felt weird going the other route. I don't know. I felt better doing it in the U.S.
Offshore versus, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily like bad, but I just didn't want to work through my own whatever. And the cultural difference, I have very like cultural context
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
content. Anyways, it's all US based. I pay like $500 a month. I get a ton of hours out of
Oh,
her.
really?
She's great. You can also have like unlimited VAs, but I always plug Time, etc. At this point, they should sponsor me. But once I find myself doing a task 3 times, I do it for the last time by like recording a loom or like a tango and then sending that to my VA. So a lot of times that could be something as simple as like, oh, every month this client, I have to send them this manual receipt for this thing, or I have to go put this receipt into QuickBooks, or I have
Yeah.
to like delete these certain emails and check that they're not this. And so, yeah, I just basically screen record and send it to her.
Right. And then if you were to go back, would you do anything different? Would you have hired someone sooner? Would you have had processes in place, or you think it happened at the right time?
No, I would have done something sooner. It's delegation for me has been really hard. It's been a really hard to like detach from something. It's been just a hard skill to learn of something I haven't learned before.
Yeah.
I would have done it sooner. I wish I would have volunteered for opportunities where in management in previous roles. I wish I would have done things even like TaskRabbit or got like a house cleaner
Yeah.
at different times in my life. I wish I would have, got somebody on Upwork to help me on something. I think it's a great skill. Like every single person here can invest $100 this month into delegating. Like $20 an hour, that's 5 hours. Can you think of 5 hours of stuff you can delegate, whether that's cleaning your house or checking your email or whatever. Like it is a challenge. It is a challenge to delegate. It's so hard.
Yeah, this is good. So, yeah, for someone listening who's like, oh, yeah, I should, again,
Should.
shoulding themselves, which, by the way, I do all the time. There's
Same.
a psychological term called masturbation, where it's like, oh, I must be doing this or blah, blah, blah. But every time I catch myself, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the thing. I kind of get in a loop where it's like, oh, I shouldn't be shitting myself. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's whatever, dude, just relax, go for a walk or something. And, but I think you bring up a good point in, okay, anytime I've had behavior change for myself, it's not like, oh, there's a game changer, new year, big thing. I have to break it down very, very small. And I like how you said, okay, I've done this the 3rd time now, so now I'm going to record it. Or I'm just going to I know I do this monotonous task, so I'm just going to take this $100 and get the ball rolling. And then it also does something magical to your brain. It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
I don't have to do this anymore. Like, what else can I not do? And go back again to that zone of genius and spend way more time there.
Yeah.
Curious, any of your favorite tools to help you optimize your life or your business?
Yeah, one I've been using lately that's been a game changer is called Flown. Flown I don't know, Flown something. If you Google like Flown productivity, it will come up. But it's essentially like virtual co-working where you go in on these 2-hour sessions, everybody sets an intention, and then you watch the people work as they give you like a focus playlist. Then you do a break in the middle of the 2 hours, maybe like a little bit of breathing exercises or a stretch, and then
Yeah.
you work the second hour. And I am so productive in these sessions. It's
Nice.
all like neuroscience based. It is it is like the most impactful tool I've used recently, and I'm raving about them. They're so good. And yeah, I think it's just something about the like body doubling that's wild. And they have career specific ones. So if you're like writing a book, sorry.
You're good.
So if you're writing a book, you can go to the writer's focus,
that's
or
cool.
if you're want to do something in your house, the
Yeah.
house focus one. So it's cool.
Nice. Okay, I've heard of focusmate.com. I've used that, and that's pretty good. It sounds like similar thing, but I'll have to check that out. Any other tools or things that help optimize your life?
Like app tools.
Anything, whether it's software or just a Zapier automation or things that have freed up more of your time and energy, and it's okay if not.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I mean, always books. I have it's
Yeah.
probably frameworks, mental models, and
What have
books.
been that's another thing. What have been either top books that have changed your life, or frameworks or mental models that you visit often?
Yeah, I mean the one thing huge. I really like this book called We Should All Be Millionaires by Rachel Rogers. It's like a finance book focused towards women that also kind of goes through the history of women's access to money in America and like offers forgiveness and then the kind of offer forgiveness to yourself and then it gets into everything. And that's been really, really impactful to me. I really like the book, The Four Agreements, too. It has just great frameworks on reframing what matters and the people, like other people's influence on you. And another just like quick hack and mental model is that you don't owe anybody time. You don't owe any marketing time. You don't owe anything to anybody. And so like getting really almost selfish has been helpful.
Yeah.
Again, going back to should, doing nothing out of obligation. So what do you, something as simple as even you have push notifications on for a random brand or an app you don't use. Like you don't owe them your attention. You would turn those off.
Right.
We tend to not think of these things because we have this obligation mind.
Right. Yeah, so true. And great advice. I read something, 85% of Americans with smartphones don't change their default notifications on their
Really?
phone.
Oh my God.
It's like, that is wild. But this has been awesome. Thank you for sharing all these things. Where can people check you out? And you have like a course. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I have 2 Maven courses, one on TikTok and one on LinkedIn. So they run about every quarter. But you can find all my stuff on Instagram and TikTok. My Instagram is Courtney Johnson, and my TikTok is Courtney Johnson.
Amazing. If you guys want to study a masterclass on communication and not only TikTok videos, but hooks and engagement, check her out. It's very good. Courtney, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.